Hello and welcome to Unsourced Wall. As always, I'm your host, Elvis. And let's start off on a good beat today because unfortunately, one of the first pieces of news that we have is a bit of a sad one. John Tamura, who played the Toxie Avenger in the second two movies of the what they call the original trilogy, even though they later punted those out of continuity in the fourth one by saying that those are the two bad sequels. The fourth one is the real sequel. But even then, those movies, part two and part three, weren't so bad. They're not my favorites. I think there's some good in them. But definitely there was a lot they could have improved on. And it's sad that the actor, John Tamura, passed away. And not like he was in much at all either. But of the four people to play this character, even though I just said he played him in parts 2 and 3, he shared the role with another actor, and they're both credited as the Toxie Avenger. I forget which one. It was either him or the other who left like midway through filming, and so they had to share the role. And Trauma is always about credit, so they both got the credit. They're both in the intro sequence and all that. So the reason I bring this up is comic news, this is movies, but the comic book adaptation of the Toxic Avenger was mostly based on the second two movies. And it takes a lot of its influence from those. The character names, the plot, and the villains are all from the second two movies, which was a radical departure from the first movie. Honestly, his last name was changed, his love interest's name was changed. They're the same characters. Just I guess maybe there was some need or some desire to step away from the first movie, which I'll never understand. It's like the fourth movie goes back to the character names, but it keeps the character personalities, which also kind of shifted, which is a strange mix. Even though the first movie, in my opinion, was the best one, it's the most solid, hilarious, and entertaining one. It's a pretty well done B movie. A lot of gross, funny scenes that are just amazing. The next three are just kind of The fourth one starts okay, but it's just way too long. And that's the thing I think about most troll movies right now, is that they are way too long. They used to be punchy and very, very kinetic, but now even the best way to put it is that part 2 and part 3 were filmed as one movie, and they're we have too much, we filmed too much, there's too much scenes, we chopped it in half, and that's what they did. And the same thing happened even recently with Return to Nukem High, which got split up into two movies because again they had filmed way too much, and that also started off good, then just kind of became incessantly boring. I'm waiting for this part 2 to come out to that one though, because maybe then we'll be able to chop it up into just one actually satisfying and entertaining movie. But yeah, the comic adaptation was actually written by Doug Munch, who did the Martian Manhunter miniseries and Slash Maraud, which is one of the best DC miniseries ever. It came out in the late 80s, and it was just this over the top, just but completely played straight 80s post-apocalyptic kind of road warrior Mad Max escape from New York, just insanity of a miniseries. It's just a lot of fun, and DC has never collected it properly. I know it's gotten collected editions overseas and in Spain, but over here it's never been recollected, and that's a huge shame because it's just an amazing miniseries. So after hearing about it, I should probably read this comic. It's done by Doug Munch, and it's also incredibly entertaining. It's a bit more of a superhero flair to it. It's not gross out or the vile humor that trauma movies are known for, but it's also still incredibly well done. It's fun. It's got great lines to it. Doug Munch is perfectly capable and handles taking the raunchy humor of trauma and making it a bit more palatable, a bit more accessible to wider audiences. And it's a shame that it got canceled really early on. It didn't last the year. It lasted until issue 11. But the ending of it all was still really, really well handled. And I don't want to give it away, but it ends on this really great cynical note. But it's also a very heartwarming note because it has to balance both of these things at once. And it's just that's a great little beat to end on. It's So I recommend reading like pretty much Slash Maraude and the original Toxic Avenger comic book series. It also had another one that was based on the Toxic Avenger cartoon, which was called Toxic Crusaders. I recommend watching the compilation movie that they did for the first couple of episodes of Toxic Crusaders. That's on Amazon Prime. It's not bad. Roger Bumpus was in it, I think, and a couple other actually well-known voice actors for cartoons were in it. They've also, rather eerily, the day before, they had announced that they are still moving forward with plans to bring back the Toxic Avenger for a fifth movie, which has been in the works for like the last 20 years almost. And if that ever happens, then I'll probably watch it. I really want to see if they're finally able to recapture that magic of the first one, which is without a doubt one of my favorite B movies ever. It's hilarious. In other news, more comic related news, Scott Snyder has been rumored as using his Justice League run that's coming out soon after No Justice wraps up to be including Jeff Johns' long lost Rise of the Seven Seas story arc for Aquaman and putting it into that, which I don't understand why they would think that he'd be doing that. It's been maybe like 4 or 5 years since any hint of Rise of the Seven Seas was ever given up. And after all they've been doing with Rebirth and all these radical changes to Aquaman individually as well, it's like, why would anyone even care anymore? There's no point. Rise of the Seven Seas was great at the moment. It was exciting at the moment because the characters were in the places they needed to be for it to be interesting. I think they might even brought Ocean Master back. And Ocean Master, when at the end of Forever Evil, is like in such a fantastic, precarious dynamic with like in between the surface world and Atlantis that Rise of the Seven Seas could have been so amazing for his character arc, for his individual personality, and where they would have taken it. But at this point, it's like, who gives a shit? And if he did do it, like, where's the impact? It's not an Aquaman run, it's a Justice League run. I mean, I think one of the weaknesses of Justice League runs is that they always focus on like maybe one character way too much. I mean, it never feels like a team adventure, especially like since Advent on New 52. That was a big problem with Jeff Johns' run, in my eyes, is that he always focused on one singular character, and it just felt uneven. Like, I think there's a way you can do that and make it interesting, but it just felt way too even. And Aquaman, like, yeah, it'd be cool, but it would have been cool like 2 or 3 years ago. Right now, it's just like that's all gone and past now. Just wrap it up, you know. Well, speaking of things being wrapped up, Shazam, the movie adaptation of Jeff Johns' Cursed Shazam, has finally finished wrapping, at least with the main actors. Asher Angel, who plays Billy Batson, put on Instagram that he is now like done shooting. Of course, this is barring any potential future reshoots, you know, which they always call people back for anyway. It's so eerie to think that it'll be coming out. And of course, I can't wait for when the reshoots actually do happen. And we get all of that noise like, oh my god, reshoots, this movie's gonna be terrible, despite the fact that there's always the need for them anyway. But you know, I can't wait to see the first footage now that there is at least one angle they could use to make up a trailer or teaser. They probably have all the footage they need of Billy. So that'd be really cool to see whenever that comes out. Speaking of, you know, more movie stuff, the Iron Man suit from the first Iron Man movie got stolen, and like, I have to say, like, you think that they would keep it under tighter lock and key than that, given the giant conglomerate and how tight-lipped Disney is with like these franchise properties, especially like successful ones, that they would not have had this, like the warehouse in Raiders of the Lost Ark, like just completely put into a place that no one can ever find. But no, apparently it got stolen, and that is just hilarious. It's so amazing. Like, and also, how do you even fence that kind of thing? It's like everyone's gonna be looking for it, and apparently, yeah, it cost $325,000. So wherever it pops up, that'll be amazing to hear, because usually it'll be funny to see who did this, how they did it, what they ended up doing with it, and how they eventually got caught. Because from what it was been reported initially, that it was just a burglary, and the Iron Man suit was just one of the things they ended up taking, which I have to call shenanigans on. It was probably directly for the suit, and then they just burgled some other stuff for it anyway. But yeah, that can never happen nowadays because these suits are now like non-existent. The Spider-Man suit doesn't exist. It's a green screen or digital effects suit that they put on Tom Holland. Maybe the mask exists, but everything else is just like completely in digital. So that can never happen anymore. So whoever did it, they probably knew like this is the only one we can ever actually get and sell. But anyway, to wrap up the news, because today was actually a pretty hefty day in terms of what I read and questions, but there's just one last piece of news I like to bring out because honestly, I don't think I could ever forgive myself if I didn't bring it out. Requiem Vampire Night, that insane horror series by Pat Mills, is on Kindle Unlimited in a box set for free. The catch is that they really, really want you to write a review for it. And so that's why I wanted to get this out, because anyone who's listening has Kindle Unlimited. They should definitely read this series just for how utterly insane and crazy out there it is. It's the story of an afterlife reincarnation existence where good is like the lowest caste of this new world, and being an evil piece of work makes you the most powerful being, pretty much. And it is just incredibly grisly. It is unashamed. It is so entirely thrilling, just if you're really into that kind of thing. And it's a box set for free. It's a digital box set, but it's still like free. Like, oh my god! Like I need to check if I have Kindle Unlimited. If I don't, I'm probably gonna get it just to read this again. It's utterly chaotic and just a gnarly thing. Definitely recommend it. But in terms of what I read, let's get into this. I read a large amount of books this week. I usually only read like 2 or 3, but this week I actually read 6. And honestly, they were all pretty good, except for one, which I honestly hate so bad. And I'll get more into that one. But let's start with Scooby Apocalypse number 25. Like I said in the first episode, which if anyone could ever understand the echoey, staticky noise of that first episode, I think it's mostly the majority of people believe that, or have the opinion that, The Flintstones by Mark Russell is the best Hanna-Barbera DC comic of that entire line that's been coming out for the last couple of years. And I won't disagree with that. I think it was a really strong book. It was definitely such a well-balanced book, and in one go it reads fantastic. But my personal favorite has always been Scooby Apocalypse. And it's not the best book. It's messy. It drags. The plot doesn't really know what it's doing, and after a certain point, it felt like it did, and like it was going to end. But then must have gotten a stay of execution because all the solicits stopped making sense and stopped correlating at all with the actual plot that was going on. Like they felt like, oh wait, we gotta stall, we gotta think of something random to fill the space with, and which isn't surprising given Giffen, because that's something that sometimes usually happens with his series. So I haven't been really that hot on the last couple of issues because it's felt so meandering and so unfocused. But this latest issue, I think, is one of the strongest it's had in a while. It's definitely a sign that this series is going to end soon. And I'm not going to spoil the thing entirely because I don't think anyone hardly reads it. And if you're interested in reading it just by hearing what I'm saying, then I don't want to like give it away. But it was highly publicized that a character of the main cast, Scooby Gang, Mystery Inc., would be leaving the comic entirely. And since this is like a post-apocalyptic thing, a survival horror comic, it became apparent how they would be leaving it. And so it's a shock, honestly, but this is the first Scooby-Doo official media where a member of Mr. Inc. has died, and it is played incredibly well. J.M. DeMatteis and Keith Giffen really, really portray it as this crushing force that has really, really taken a chunk out of the characters that that make up the the main 5 members of Mr. Inc. And it's honestly shocking. The comic hasn't been really that honed in a while, and this was an incredibly well structured issue, and the character focus and interplay was amazing just for this one moment. And since, like I said, why does this mean that it's wrapping up? Because Giffen has a habit of like completely trashing the toy box whenever the series is canceled, and killing off characters is totally up his alley with that. Yeah, he did it with Legion of Superheroes. He did it with Threshold and countless others, honestly. So yeah, I would definitely expect that it's probably not going to last until number 30. I think number 30 is going to be the last one, just to give it 5 good-sized trades. And because even then, it has a backup series, too, for the last couple of issues, called Secret Squirrel, that follows the meandering and knowingly, winkingly meandering adventures of a talking squirrel that's also a super secret agent. And this latest issue, it finally brings that all to a head. It brings the main plot forward. So, if that's ending, then Scooby Apocalypse as a whole probably doesn't have much long for the world anyway. And I'll be sad to see it go. I hope they land on their feet with this. This is a bold move, and it could lead to a lot more interesting stuff. I think that the series has done such a great job with these dramatic beats sprinkled throughout the issues they've had. And that's why I think that the last couple of issues have been boring me, because they've been so focused on dragging things out instead of just getting straight to the character moments that really define the first half of issues up until like number 15. The little character moments of self-reflection really made it for me. But of 2 different young superhero comics I read, both were really great. And the first one was Sideways, number 4, which I think is without a doubt my favorite of the Metal spinoffs. Even though like it totally stands so great on its own. I hardly remember even reading this issue that Metal was a thing at all, because it's so perfectly isolated. And I think we all know by now that that's what I really like. Even if it's spinoff, I like something to be just so pinpointed and focused. And this issue really helps to cement Sideways' character, who throughout the first couple of issues comes off a bit lackadaisical, a bit of a foolhard of a kid who just wants to be YouTube famous. And this really sells it a lot more, because you get to see just how unprepared and how just completely out of his element he is in, because he's only in it for the fame. He's only in it just for the exposure. It's kind of like Booster Gold in a sense, except to mention Booster Gold would be a bit of a disservice to Booster Gold's relative competency. That's what makes Sideways so entertaining, though, because he has such a hill to surpass at this point. Everything's against him, even himself. And this issue was both hilarious at realizing that, but also kind of frightening at realizing that, because characters like Vibe or the Flash, even though you can pinpoint Sideways' powers, he can teleport. It's way more than that. He's accidentally overpowered as hell, and it is terrifying that he is just so wishy-washy about it, which is the point. It's really hammering that in home. And Dan DiDio and Justin Jordan and Kenneth Rocafort are doing a fantastic job. And where this issue ends off really brings home a lot of really potentially funny and catastrophic plot points that I just can't wait to see brought to light. But the second comic I read, also featuring a young, somewhat brash hero, is New Superman and the Justice League of China, which is pretty much over. I think people have commented on that's likely ending with number 24, which is a shame, because number 23, this issue, marks the end of a story arc that is probably one of the best of this already incredibly stellar series. The Aquaman of North Korea, aka the Dragon Son, is done so incredibly well in only 4 issues, of which he's in like maybe 80%, not 100% in his issues. Like the first part of this story arc, I think he's more or less barely in it, and even then, just the character pacing of him, the focus on on just his personality traits, how that relates to his powers, how that relates to his culture, is just so well done. Yang's writing on this and how the other Chinese superheroes react to this North Korean hero, or as he is at the end of the story arc, is just amazing. And it's just so full of life. It's just so humorous. It's got a lot of heart to it, and it's a shame to see it end. It just got rebranded and now it's ending. It's saddening, actually. I know there's some hope that people have put out that this is just the hiatus. Like Cyborg was put on hiatus for a little while before coming back with the same numbering even. And everyone knows by now that Yang is working on other projects with DC, including a young adult graphic novel. I think is Superman versus the Klan, and that's great. Honestly, I can't wait to read that as well. But if that's true, that it's just a hiatus to work on other things, I hope he comes back to this, because like all these characters still have so much places to go. Because this issue brings forward a lot of great character threads that could lead to like even another 25 or 24 issues of solid story. Batman of China, the Wonder Woman of China, the Flash of China, they're all so well crafted. And that's not something you can say a lot about young superheroes, and especially nowadays. They're usually not that great. They're usually way too brash, and the brashness becomes like a two-dimension of themselves. That bold quality, like, oh, they should be bold, and that's it. They're never fleshed out. But these characters are so incredibly fleshed out, Sideways and the new Superman of China cast, and there's just so much they could do with this. And I hope number 24, when it comes out next month, is the end that they all deserve, if it has to be an end. And I definitely recommend picking it up if you haven't. It's a solid teen superhero coming of age story, honestly. It reminds me so much of the original 90s Superboy run, which is a bit dated and some of the concepts are a bit out there. It was very much teen fulfillment fantasies at some point, which I think are a bit out of place. I've heard a lot of hate against some of those plot aspects, but at the time, and I still think the core of that series just holds up so immaculately that some of that stuff you can just kind of ignore because it hooks you in. And Superman is so of the now. It's so perfectly modern teenage hero. And that's something I wanted to say about the next thing I read. And that's something I did say about the next thing I read, but has now really wasted all that potential, was Youngblood. The new Youngblood reboot that Image has been coming out with. That I really enjoyed the first arc of. I thought that first arc of the new Youngblood series was so great. After every issue, I've been going on online and on different forums to say like, yes, this series is so fun, it's so energetic, it's so enthusiastic, and it just so completely takes advantage of the fact that these are meant to be young characters, the young bloods, but it has totally wasted all that potential with this current arc, which is nothing but a mishmash of half-formed, rushed ideas. There are several good plot threads they bring up that they then completely squander and make uninteresting. They go for the cliche. It's like, okay, we'll subvert your expectations about what you thought this plot was going to be in the first arc by doing an even more tired and overused trope in its place. It's so disheartening when you really enjoy a series and even though the creators are still the same, it becomes apparent that they had no forward plan at all, that they got lucky. And that's honestly what I believe, because it's not like the writing has changed. There's parts of individual issues that I believe are really solid and they could have worked, but they're just rushing through them so fast, like they're panicking or something. Like, oh hey, remember this plot, this big villain we've been propping up, this enemy force? Yeah, that's done. Also, that thing that could have been a great dynamic between this character and the enemy force? Yeah, that's done as well. Or how about these interplay dynamics that we really tried to hammer on the first arc? Yeah, no, they're done as well. And now for the next issue, for number 12, they're bringing in Rob Liefeld for an arc called Blood Wars. And that's just so it's so backwards. It's moving backwards. And that's not what I felt when I read the first arc. It felt like a forward progression. It was bringing in stuff from Ellis. It was bringing in stuff from Moore. It felt like a completely honest and earned reboot of the brand. And now it doesn't. And that's just such a low blow. So yeah, I'm dropping it with this arc. I mean, if I hear it gets good again, I'll probably get back on it, but no, I'm done. Anyway, of the mainline comics that I read, the last one had to have been No Justice, #1. Now, No Justice is the event that's spitting out of the other event, Metal, from Scott Snyder. And Metal I really actually enjoyed, were it not for how incredibly muddled and incoherent the ending of that was. So it seems like I would be really biased against this new event that is solely about that incomprehensible and just ridiculous ending or non-ending of Metal. And for the most part, that's not true. I actually enjoyed this first issue in parts. It's only 4 issues, and doesn't seem like it's going to be very weighty 4 issues. It's going to be more like Metal, which is all about the pieces of the event. It's about like these small little moments that are solely about just having that impact of, oh, this character and that character doing this, or this character saying that to that other character, that kind of event logic that sometimes writers get into, where like that's the fun of events. And I can understand that, and for the most part of Metal, I actually really bought into that. I think there's a lot of parts of Metal that I still enjoy just because of how ridiculous and how knowingly ridiculous it was in that sense. And No Justice has that in parts as well, just that with Metal, the main thread of Metal, it was sort of more threatening and a bit more understandably stakes worthy, whereas in No Justice, it's just DC versions of Celestials, and oh no, the source wall has been broken for like the 5th time, and I just can't care. It's just the most boring thread of all time. It's just such a bland excuse to have all of these things happen, and there's even more bland excuses for other things that happen in this issue as well. And in the rest of the event, it's almost too simple. I know it's trying to be both like this high stakes, high risk kind of adventure, but the circumstances around it are too simple. They're too obvious and they're too cliched. Like, you can play with cliches, yes, but you can't. It's just trying to have its cake and eat it too. In that way, where it's like they have characters saying, "Only I can stop this. You have to listen to me," and then they immediately just kind of like we've seen that so many times, played for laughs. And is it meant to be played for laughs here? I don't think it really is. I think it's just too blunt. It's too on the nose. And I enjoyed some of the bluntness in Metal because it was counteracted by a lot of the actual kind of horrific turns that it took. And here, not really. I enjoy more like the small little interplay banter than anything else of the actual plot. And it's only 4 issues, so I'll probably read it all, but it's not a promising start overall. Even then, it feels like it's going to be stretched out for 4 issues. Like, they don't have enough plot or enough of a weighty premise for 4. The source wall being broken is of no consequence. It's been broken 5 times at least in the New 52 alone. It's just not an interesting plot concept. Like, oh, what's beyond the source wall? It's God. Technically, it should be God beyond the source wall. There's the source wall that talks to Highfather and New Gods on New Genesis, and then the source wall that, I guess, encircles the source, protect the source's source energy, and that's God, isn't it? But no, it's always something new. It's always, oh no, it's something from another dimension, or oh no, it's even beyond their comprehensible evils, or okay, who gives a shit? I mean, who really cares? And this time it's, oh wait, it's DC Celestials, and Brainiac has put a hotbed of bait on Earth, so we have to save Earth from the Celestials, who are 4 different coded elementals as well. Mystery and wonder and inertia or whatever, it's so bland. As long as Manipul is on it, I'll probably read it. But after that, if it continues into Justice League, then that says a lot of more worrisome things about Scott Snyder's Justice League run than if he's still going to be playing around with Jeff Johns' 5-year-old expired plot threads, you know. But other than that, the last comic I read this week, that this time I actually had so much enthusiasm for, it came out of nowhere. It's actually on the penultimate issue of the miniseries, Planet of the Apes Ursus. It is without a doubt not only one of the best Planet of the Apes comics I've ever read, it's also one of the best tie-in comics I've ever read. Ursus, when I first heard this coming out, I'm like, oh my god, Ursus? That's one of the most boring characters of the original Planet of the Apes movie series. I think he's such a boring and blunt and dated character in that original movie he's in, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, the second one. But Ursus, the miniseries, takes that and it makes it such a complex and thoroughly emotionally engaging character study and portrait of this really jingoistic and two-dimensional character from one movie where he was probably the worst part of it. Not only that, but it takes the first two movies, which I've always felt kind of a disconnect because like hardly some of the actors and some of the plot threads from the first movie weren't carried into the second one. And there's always been like that bridge between them, both also technologically as well, because you had in the first one, okay, humans have evolved and apes have evolved. Then in the second one, you have, oh wait, there's this highly organized and developed mutants, technokinesis, ESP subculture worshipping an atom bomb under the earth. Wait, not atom bomb, an alpha omega bomb, the world destroyer. It's a cobalt bomb. It just feels like such a jump. I enjoyed that movie. I think that movie has so much to offer. I even loved mutants. The mutants are probably one of my favorite sci-fi concepts of that movie. But Ursus does this amazing thing where it's able to both give us the backstory and more introspection to this really flat character, this one-note character, but does it in a way that also bridges these first two movies together in a really clever and interesting way. It has a lot of sense to it, and reading it just reminds me so much of what I love about those first two movies and that original series in general. No matter how much the highs and lows of it got, it felt so fresh. It felt so re-engaging. Like I knew what was going to happen. I know where these characters are going, but I kind of rediscovered them, and it's just a complete pleasure. And I can't believe I've been sleeping on it for 5 months. And the last issue is out next month, and I just can't wait to read it. I hope it sticks its landing because it is so great. And I definitely recommend it. It's the highest recommendation of it. Anyway, let's go on to the questions because there's a lot of questions this week, and I hope I'm able to get through them all. The first one comes from Tex Thompson with my opinions about the Simonson Orion run. Now, in the first episode of Unsourced Wall, I mentioned Simonson Orion as probably one of the 3 or 4 good things the New Gods have ever been in with regards to DC Comics. And I stand by that. But I should amend that by saying that, to me, it's still a bit of a downgrade because it's also not very consistent. The first couple of arcs are so great. Honestly, and even though it's technically a sequel to John Byrne's horrifically terrible Fourth World run, and there's some elements of that run that continue on into Orion, it picks up pretty much deliberately vague enough to be a direct sequel to the original Fourth World run. And it works wonders like that. It captures that spirit as close as humanly possible back to Kirby, honestly. I've never seen someone do so great a facsimile of Kirby in terms of emotion, atmosphere, and energy than in those first Orion issues. But at a certain point, it stops being able to say anything kind of interesting. Orion has a character, and some of the characters are still enjoyable, but it just stops being so enthusiastic. You stop feeling that energy to it. It just kind of drags on, then it gets pulled into like different kind of events and stuff around the DC universe, and it just loses that magic. It really does lose that magic near the end. I think it's able to pull it back and like the very final issues. It just goes on for too long, and I think that if it had been more of like a concise miniseries, it might be even more critically acclaimed than it is today, because I don't think it had the longevity to it that maybe even Simonson's Thor had more of. Honestly, like Simonson's Thor, everyone remembers that for being such a great singular run, and the Ryan isn't really that popular, at least in comparison, even though they're both based on like very noticeably Kirby works. And I think that's because he probably had more ideas in Thor than he did for Orion, because it does lose its legs near the end. But still recommended. That's just how I feel about that. All right, so next question comes from the Real Jarks, asking about my top 5 favorite and top 5 least favorite animated adaptations. And this is probably the hardest question I had to answer, because if I like something, then I'll remember it, and if I don't like something, then I'll probably won't continue on with it, and so it becomes less memorable. I don't really think about it all that time. So when it comes to the top 5 best, that was actually pretty hard, because there's so much I actually really enjoy. But then bottom 5, I had to pretty much like, wait a minute, can I even really say this if I only watched one episode of it? Would that be fair? So I decided to do something different with the bottom 5. But top 5 has to be, in no particular order, all right? Static Shock, Spider-Man the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, and the Boondocks Animated Series that came out on Adult Swim. Those are probably all of the first 5 that I really wanted to put out there. I love them all for various reasons. There's more I didn't mention, but Popeye is a classic that doesn't need to be said. Stuff like the Sinbad shorts or the Alibaba short are just amazing. They're iconic, so memorable and hilarious. Static Shock was probably my favorite of the DCAU shows, even though it was only very tangentially done. But arcs like the Rubber Band Man saga that went throughout this series was so engaging to me at the time. His rise and fall and continued struggle to rise again as a person, not just as like a villain, but as a real character development was really, really something, and it really, I think, shaped the way I enjoy heroic reprisals like that. Spider-Man, I enjoyed because, Spider-Man, Venom, Green Goblin stuff, that Green Goblin voice, and especially like when they did the whole Hobgoblin saga, it was just so good. I love that show, even though it probably doesn't hold up as much as I think it does. Superman the Animated Series, it really did flesh out my initial love for like that old school Silver Age concepts, like Mr. Mxyzptlk or Bizarro. Like those were my first exposures to those kind of characters, and they've remained favorites since then, honestly. And Boondocks, I actually read the comic strip I gave in newspapers way before the show even began. And that used to be like one of the main reasons I ever picked up a newspaper, was to read the Boondocks strip, and it broke my heart a little bit, honestly, when the strip finally ended and he went on to work on the cartoon full time, on television projects full time, Aaron McGruder. But I really enjoyed that comic, and even though it's not the perfect adaptation, and I still wish that Caesar had shown up in the cartoon, because I really enjoyed Caesar's character, and I love all those characters as they were in the comic strip. The Boondocks show, the first 3 seasons, did so well with it, and it captured that humor that I loved, and it made it something so special. On the bottom 5, I could not, again, like I said, I could not think of a true bottom 5, because if I really hated it, it sticks in my memory so much. But here's what I came up with. Superman Doomsday, based on a Death Return of Superman. Now, Death Return of Superman is one of my favorite Superman stories. It's not everyone's favorite. I know it's got a lot of flack thrown against it, but as a whole, it is really one of the things that I truly enjoy about Superman comics. It captures almost every single beat. The death part of the saga may not be the most cleverly written or engagingly written, But the death issue itself is fantastic. Funeral for a Friend and Roll Without are so great, have so many great moments about the civilians in Metropolis, his parents, his friends, how they react to this. So emotionally captivating. You have Bibbo Lebowski becoming Superman of Hell's Kitchen. You have the introductions to the various reign of the Superman must stop Doomsday as Steel climbs out of the rubble. Eradicator, my personal favorite, just being this needlessly edgy Punisher-esque anti-hero, and he gets his own character arc that is my favorite character arc of the entire saga. Superboy is amazing. He is just so energetic and funny and entertaining. But yeah, Superman Doomsday, the cartoon direct-to-video movie that they came out with like a couple years ago, complete trash. It is just so boring. It is a hackneyed, bizarro Doomsday mashup plot that is just dumb. And that's saying something. It's just dumb. It's boring. It's badly written. And I don't see why anyone would ever see it. The Ultimate Avengers movies that they came out with based on Ultimates 1 and 2, those aren't good. They're a bit boring. They're well made, no doubt. But Ultimates 1 and 2 had such a life to them that I don't think these captured. But yeah, that's why I didn't want to make a bottom 5. It's hard to make a bottom 5 because either I hate it and I think it's trash, or I just think it's kind of boring. And the rest of this list, I'm sorry, could not make up to an actual fruition. Sorry, Jarks. Some various odds and ends of the DC animated universe. The Bruce Timm stuff. There's lots of characters I think were done a real shoddy handle. Like Hawkman, it was just complete trash in the DCAU. Sinestro, all these little different things, they just don't work. But yeah, that's probably the most I want to think about that. Let's move on to another interesting question, this time from Medea. Again, thank you for another question. Books where my enjoyment primarily came from the art, and also books where great writing maybe overlook crappy art. This is a great question, and I actually have a couple answers for both of these. The first part, enjoyment primarily came from the art. That's a trickier one because there's no real... I've never been that kind of person that would be able to overlook really shoddy storytelling for great art. I've always been a person who can do the opposite, and that gets a lot of raised eyebrows. But a shoddy story and shoddily written characters, I just can't get into, even if the art is like so beautiful and so amazing. It just doesn't feel natural to me. I just can't get into it. I just drop it. But there's two different examples that I think play into this. The first one being Secret Wars by Jonathan Hickman and S.I. Ribic. Now, Jonathan Hickman wrote Secret Wars, and it was probably the most boring event in ages. Not even a bad event. It's just really boring. It's not interesting. It does a lot of repetition, and it doesn't go anywhere. Honestly, it's just there to be there, and then it just kind of ends. But S.I. Ribic's art, it was fun to look at. I enjoyed looking at his art, and if it had been really crappy art, I probably would have not finished reading it. But the art was kind of pretty, and it was this big thing that everyone was talking about. So I probably just suffered through it, and S.I. Ribic's art made it easier to suffer through. Let's put it at that. But on the other spectrum of where the art matters more, and I think had more of an impact on me than the writing, is probably The Goon, and that's not a slam against The Goon. Eric Powell's The Goon is probably one of the best comics I've read that deal with this kind of mishmash of horror and humor. But if I had to be honest, Eric Powell's art, that whole aesthetic, the whole atmosphere, the emotion of the characters as drawn, the storytelling that's carried just solely through the art is probably amazing. It's probably a masterpiece. It's magnum opus in my opinion. Eric Powell's magnum opus. It's so great. And then there's sometimes that the writing can be a bit hackneyed. Just the jokes sometimes don't land. and sometimes like the setups don't kind of land. Like the balance can either work really tightly, like it needs to be like a really great issue, or it's gonna be a really great arc. But sometimes the premises and the balance between the horror and humor just isn't quite there. But then again, the art does that so much better than the writing could. So it's more in its favor than it can ever fall, I think. And it's because of the one creator, it's the one singular voice, that the art can, I think, really capture that better than maybe the writing can sometimes. So those would be my answer for the primarily art portion. But primarily writing, I'm gonna bring out just some examples, because like I said, I've always been able to do that, and I want just to use this platform to talk about some series that I think everyone could use a shot at, or were just so heinously mismanaged. And the first one is probably Ultimate FF by Joshua Hale Fialkov. I also sometimes call it Ultimate Fantastic Four Mark II, because that's pretty much what it was riffing on. It was part of Fialkov's attempted relaunch of the Ultimate Universe after like Jonathan Hickman and Humphreys had kind of had their way with them. And he did a really great job of a lot of these aspects. He did an excellent Rick Jones miniseries in Hunger. He did a great opening arc on Ultimates that dealt with like the Infinity Gems, the Gauntlets, and the Ultimate Kane the Conqueror, which was also really interesting. And Ultimate FF was really poised to being like, I was really excited for it, because like finally the Fantastic Four have come back with under a capable writer, because they had been really mistreated before they had imploded during Ultimatum. And I thought that last couple of their appearances since then under Bendis and even under Hickman, everyone always said that the Maker is fantastic. But Hickman's Maker is just, has always been something that was born out of a really botched premise to begin with. Because, just a little side note on Ultimate Reed Richards, but the core of his character is that he only stayed because of his friends. If he had had his way, he would have left this universe to go search for more purpose, more meaning, emotion, and emotional connection elsewhere. That's what his whole character core was about, finding emotional connections. And if he couldn't find it here, he would find it somewhere else. And then you had Bendis going like, nah, he's a school shooter, man. He's a psychopath. He just wants to burn the world and everything up and rule it. And then you have John Hickman run with that. And you can say that the end result is something interesting, but it's not true to the character at all. It's impure at the core. You just rotten foundation. And what Fialkov did in his Ultimates run before Ultimate FF was really give a reasoning for that. It made sense. It was an obvious retcon, but it made sense. It was true to the character. It was true to the original series, Ultimate Fantastic Four, and I really appreciated that. And so that's why I was so excited for this. And it came out and had the worst art I had ever fucking seen. This art on Ultimate FF was just so eye-gougingly bad. It was just so horrible. It was like dog shit. It was like chicken scratches. And it eventually got better in a sense. It got more polarizing. I think everyone can admit that the first issues of Ultimate FF had really crap art, but then it got polarizing because it became like kind of Play-Doh people. It was like very, very soft, chunky, like blobby kind of looking people, which is okay. It still wasn't great art. It was still really, really cringy art. But the writing itself was interesting. Fialkov knows what the Ultimate Fantastic Four is all about. He knows what the characters have done. He knows the corded characters, and what other writers who didn't understand that, he knows what they did as well. He mixes them all up to make something that is understandable, is competent, is coherent, and there's lots of stuff in those issues that even tries to solve stuff from Ultimatum that didn't even make sense back then, and brings them forward a bit more. And it's also pretty funny. It's also pretty funny. One of my favorite lines is when the Ultimate FF meet Miles Morhames, the Ultimate Spider Pig, or Spider Ham, and Dr. Doom, who has joined the Ultimate FF in a sense, grabs Miles and pushes him against the wall and says, "Enough of that, you swine." And Miles says, "That's racist." And that is just the most amazing little thing. It's just so hilarious. And a lot of little things are like that. You have this whole double page spread of the Ultimate Animal Marvel Universe, and I think it was Galactopus, like a platypus, and it was just so good. It's just it was a really fun little comic, and they really did it dirty by putting a horrible artist on it and by cutting it so short. In any case, so that was one. Another would be Fused, Canned Heat by Steve Niles, I think. It was one of the first Image comics I read. I was like 13 or something, and it really grabbed me. It was about this guy who's an amputee who gets trapped in a robot suit that molds to his body. And first, I think it's 4 issues, and the first 2 issues are done by one artist, and it's like very standard kind of Image looking fare of like from like 2005 ish. And then the next 2 issues are done by like Ben Templesmith, and it's just a jarring thing. Not that Ben Templesmith is bad, just that it's such a jarring fit. But by that point, I was so engaged in the story and how it was being written that I completed reading it. It's still one of my favorite little reads, even though I cannot recommend it because of that shift. There's too much of a divide going on there that is just so jarring, and it's not a good fit, I don't think. And other than that, I think line wide, I need the Avatar Press stuff that I enjoy, like Garth Ennis's Crossed minis, or Warren Ellis's kind of stuff, or even Uber. They're hampered by a very greasy looking house style. I think only ones like Providence, Jason Burrows, and the colorists on there really stepped their game up, and Providence is like an immaculate, like fantastic art showcase. But other than that, a lot of the things that Avatar Press does that are good is going to be hampered by like this sweaty looking characters and just greasy and oil looking. It's disgusting, which I guess works for them, but it makes it hard to read when it's actually well written and entertaining and clever, which is rare, but it happens. So thanks, Medea, for that question. That was really fun to answer. And our last question for comics is from Norin Radical, which is what do I prioritize when reading a comic, like the dialogue, the art, the page itself, lettering. And I got to say, it's going back to what I said about being able to think of a good story, being able to put that first rather than the art. The dialogue. The dialogue is what I prioritize most because that's like the most direct interaction with the characters. You can pick up subtleties there that sometimes the art is either, if it's bad, is either too not tone fitting to carry out, or it can be the opposite, like the Goon, where the art does a lot more of the work. But this is specifically, in that case, in the art, the emotions of the characters and the dialogue, I guess, in different situations, I guess. One or the other, depending on which one is on point at that time, is what I prioritize. Usually, by that point, I'll have glommed on to like what I feel is doing more of the work. But our last question is a special one. It's also from Tex Thompson. He's asking for my thoughts on Arrested Development seasons 3 and 4. Now that the season 5 trailer was released just the other day. And honestly, season 3, I think, got a lot of flack that it was undeserved. It's to me like Seinfeld's finale. Seinfeld's finale isn't perfect, but it's still funny and it's still in keeping with the show. And I think that same could be said of Arrested Development season 3. I think the plots were still really, really funny, and the jokes and the deliveries were still all fine. I honestly don't understand why people have such a problem with it. Even the finale, as it was, that could have ended there. Could have ended at season 3, and that finale is all around just a good finale. I don't understand why there was so much uproar about it, or needing a season 4. It ended on such a great note, and such a great bookend to everything. Yeah, I like season 3. I don't understand why people have so much complaints about it. The character were funny. The seasonal arcs were good, like with Rita and Buster and the army and going to Iraq, all that stuff. But season 4, I think, deserved a lot of the flack, and I think it deserves a lot more flack than it's getting. Because I think there's been since in the years since it came out, because it's been years at this point since season 4 came out. that people have tried to rebrand it as being bold and experimental. Like, yeah, they did this whole experiment and it didn't pan out, but it's still very clever and it's trying its best. But at that point, it just doesn't. It's just front loaded with a lot of really long stretches of boring. And I think that the main problem was, and not even like the remix really grasps this, is that the entire season is one episode. It has one episode worth of actual story content because it's structured like an episode. An episode has all these different strands, and then they all converge into like one big punchline or one big paralleled punchline, even if the strands don't converge in that sense. And that's what season 4 is structured as, even in the remix and even the original version. And so I always thought like season 4 as a whole, okay, but season 4 individually is just a really, really boring, kind of mostly boring piece of entertainment. And I still think about the remix. Remix, I think, is a little bit better because all these little unused jokes and deleted scenes they had that are added back in. Those are pretty funny. Those are consistently funny, but again, it's still just pretty boring overall. Even if the entire season as a whole, both times, is interesting, and I hope season 5 is a bit better. Wait, I actually forgot. There's one question that I didn't get to, and it's actually one of the most interesting questions I got. And I only say that because it gives me the opportunity to talk about something that I have to say is really dear to my heart. This is from Moon again at GUVATM on Twitter, and his question is, what's the oldest comic you're really into and why? And there's no other answer. There's only one big answer to this, and that's Flash Gordon. Alex Raymond's original Flash Gordon Sunday strips. Those are probably one of the best comics I've ever read. It is so amazing. It's from 1934, and that original run of Sunday strips from Flash, Dale, and Professor Zarkov, going from Earth to Mongo, and then fighting the dragon, fighting the red apes, going through the crystal caverns where everything turns upside down, meeting the Witch Queen, meeting the Hawkmen, building the army, going to Arborea, the tournament of Mongo, fighting in the pits with Baron's jealousy over Aura, and all this craziness. It's Flash getting his own kingdom and this really false truce between him and Ming. It's really great sword and sorcery type of stuff, but with a weird sci-fi injection in outer space. And it takes itself just so seriously in where it counts. The stakes are there. It's adventurous. I know a lot of people, whenever someone brings this Flash Gordon, they think of the movie, the Queen music, that kind of campy nature of that movie, Sam Jones. It's pretty much the pop cultural touchstone that still persists of Flash Gordon is that movie. And you have Jeff Parker, a comic writer who is not without talent. He's a really great writer. But then you have, because of that movie's influence and that impact the movie had, you have things where his run of Flash Gordon for Dynamite, I believe, was just horrible and jokey and not interesting at all. And that's totally in the opposite spirit of the original comic strips, where Flash is like sword fighting. Everyone is having like these real trials and tribulations that are so exciting and so swashbuckling and just so really exhilarating. And it's that main run of strips that you can actually collect from Titan's beautiful hardcover library series of editions in 4 volumes. The first 3 volumes, they collect the entirety of whatever Raymond actually did. And the 4th volume is from his immediate successor, who pretty much ties up the loose ends. Raymond's run ends on a pretty big cliffhanger. You can read up to that point on its own. It's a fine cliffhanger, but it's still a cliffhanger nonetheless. And the 4th volume brings it all home. It finds a great ending for it, and it's exciting on its own. So those four volumes are amazing, and I miss that in comics. The closest thing I found to it that has that same kind of sense of adventure, action, high fantasy, and sci-fi was probably Mark Millar's Starlight, which which at the time it came out at the same time Jeff Parker's Flash Gordon was, and between the two, there's no contest. Starlight was the better Flash Gordon. It captured that essence, it captured that core so excellently, and I recommend both Starlight and Alex Raymond's Flash Gordon to anyone who loves adventurous comics, sword fighting, ray guns, saving princesses, saving a world. That whole fantasy aspect. It's really amazing stuff. But that wraps up all the questions that we have. If, as always, if you're interested in sending a question of your own in or sending me thoughts, you can comment below if you're listening to this on Castbox or YouTube, or you can DM me or comment on my questions threads on Twitter at the Snickman, THE_SNICK. You can also find this podcast on iTunes. Thank you, and see you next week.